The media often report that men die earlier than women and poor people sooner than those who are wealthy. Is that really true?
Absolutely. Absolutely true. Although the difference, for instance, if you look at life expectancy, which is probably familiar concept to most people, then in the Western countries, let's talk just about Europe. In the Western countries, there would be 2 years difference at least, or 3 years between the length of life in a certain country between men and women. Mm-hmm. If you go a little bit further, so you are, let's say, in Central Eastern Europe, then this difference will be larger. And if you go to Eastern Europe, meaning Russia, Ukraine, this area of country, then the difference will be even larger. I just would like to give you some figures about Hungary. These are not the newest ones, but I think it's quite dramatic. It's something which is characteristic to the mid-2000s, okay? Mm-hmm. So you look at age of 25. Let's take someone without any basic education, and the person is a man. Then the further life expectancy is 31.9 years, and if you take someone with higher education, that is 48.4 years, which is 16 years of difference. Wow. If you do the same calculation for women, then you will get 10 years difference, and if you just put together the average for men and the average for women, then you will get a 8-year difference. Mm. So this is how I can illustrate that if you go to those groups which are a little bit marginalized, normally small population groups who have very, very low education, then you can get very extreme figures. Mm-hmm. So the disadvantage of these people is really very, very hard, very deep, and they are really very far from the majority of the whole of the population. Well, I would say that in the European context, talking about the broad Europe, a little bit more about more countries than those which belong to the EU, then it is a kind of gradient. So you started from the situation is the best in the northern countries, mm-hmm. When you have rather small differences and very high life expectancy. Mm-hmm. We do notice that Sweden, Norway, Iceland, they are competing for mm-hmm. the first places. Nowadays Switzerland is also doing very well. And if you look at women, then also French and Spanish women are doing very well. If we go a little bit further to Central Eastern Europe, then we get lower life expectancies and higher, larger differences. Mm-hmm. And if we go to Russia, then we get enormously short life expectancy and huge differences. So this would be the pattern, the broad pattern. But we also, maybe it would be also very fruitful to look at the dynamic in time, because mm-hmm. it was not always the case. Yeah. So if we go back to the, interestingly, in the beginning of the 1970s, life expectancies in Europe were very, very close to each other. And after then, the Western countries started to have this so-called cardiovascular revolution. Mm-hmm. So basically, cardiovascular disease mortality started to fall, and the rest of Europe did not experience this. After the fall of the Berlin Wall, the countries, we hoped that these countries would catch up. Mm-hmm. but it did not happen. So what we see today, that improvement of life expectancy has the same space. So it is, but the difference is somehow always the same if you look at the whole branch of the countries together. So somehow the difference is not narrowing. So life expectancy is increasing, but not enough. If you look at a little bit more in detail the countries of the Central Eastern European group, you could see that Slovenia and the Czech Republic was actually very close to the Western level, and there were the two countries, just talking about the EU countries, Romania and Bulgaria was very much behind. And Hungary, Slovakia, Poland were somehow between. But nowadays, Hungary seems to join to Romania and Bulgaria. So within this context, Hungary experienced a worsening regarding life expectancy, regarding economic growth also, and the two is maybe connected. And I believe that discrepancies and differences are also increasing, unfortunately. If we go to Eastern countries, then the question of nutrition comes up. And I would like to warn here that those figures which shows that percentage that families who are facing difficulties in buying food, it is always around 30% in these countries. And nowadays we had a very, very bad figure for Hungary. The majority of the families who have small children, they are facing difficulties in buying food. So in this point, we cannot really talk about alcohol, we cannot really talk about smoking, because these very basic necessities are missing. So this is why I'm not expecting any improvement in the near future.